Hello and welcome. This is Creatively Torn, a channel where I mostly talk about books, but sometimes don't. This is going to be a video with a list. I've made videos about a list of sci-fi books I want to read, a list of fantasy books I want to read, and even further back I did a list of Stephen King books I want to read, and then just a general list of authors I want to read. So let's be in that vein. This time I'm tackling another genre with 10 horror books I want to read. So just some ground rules before we get started. There's not going to be any Stephen King books in this list. Since I just mentioned I already have a list of Stephen books I want to read. And though not all of those are horror books, I feel like I've covered a lot of his books already on the channel. And I do want to read a lot of his books as well, so it's kind of a given. But for this list, I want to prioritize other authors, so I want to exclude Stephen King from this list, and also, by extension, Joe Hill, which is his son, if you didn't know that. He has written a good number of horror books as well that I want to read. I did talk about him in another video as well. So neither of those two are going to appear on this list, though I do want to read their books also. For this one, I'm going to keep it to one book per author. So I'm going to either choose the one I want to read the most, or the one that I will probably most likely start with, or maybe just the one that I've heard of more often. This is going to be a mix of old and new books, but mostly new. This will be a change for me, as I mostly have been prioritizing older books as of now. But in this list, I think it's mostly newer stuff. And as per usual, it's not in any kind of order. So this would be an unordered top 10 list. So without further ado, let's get started. The first one on the list is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This seems to be kind of an homage to slasher and horror movies. Something about a girl who has a knowledge of the slasher genre and has to use that to solve a string of murders or something. Not quite sure. But I know that Stephen Graham Jones is a very popular horror author these days, so I want to get to him. And I will likely be starting with this one. So next up is an author that I actually have read before. This is Paul Tremblay. The book I have here is A Head Full of Ghosts. And so I have read his Cabin book before, which is a novella, I think. Didn't quite like it, but I think the writing style showed promise. I think he has a good talent for writing, so I do want to check out his other work, just to get a better picture of his skill, I guess. So I want to read this one, and also the Pallbearers Club, are one that I've heard a lot about. Well, not a lot, but a fair amount. So A Head Full of Ghosts is a possession or exorcist book, which is fairly standard. So we'll see his spin on it and see, just how that goes. The next one is The Troop by Nick Cutter. I actually have a Nick Cutter book on digital. It's a different one. It's Little Heaven, but I think it doesn't quite lean into the horror genre as much as this one does, at least from what I have read of it. So I will likely be starting with The Troop. I think it's the one that is most well known for him. It's about a troop of Boy Scouts or whatever who go camping, and then there's a murder on the loose or something. I don't know. It's apparently very violent with a lot of body horror, so it should be interesting to see how that plays out. Going back to the first older book on this list, this is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison. This is one that I've heard a lot about, just in terms of the classic horror genre. I don't know what it's about. I think the actual story is a short story contained within a volume of other work, but I mainly want to read this one. Harlan Ellison is apparently one of those authors that kind of seems to defy genre, as he writes different things such as sci-fi and cosmic horror and different things like that. Next up is a book called It Rides a Pale Horse, It's by Andy Marino. This one is sort of about an artist who gets swept up in some kind of evil plot. I guess just a lot of cosmic horror and a lot of weird things that come into play with this one, which definitely sounds intriguing. Being a member of the art world per se, being a fan of art is probably a better way to put it. I do immediately have interest in this one, just by the premise. It sounds really interesting. It sounds like something that will be hard to predict, hard to put down, so I definitely want to give this one a try as well. Next on the list is called Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. This one seemed like your standard murder house book, with a murder in a house, hence the phrase murder house. So for Kill Creek, this honestly is one that I saw on somebody's anti-TBR list, and all the things that they mentioned that they didn't like about the book are things that really interested me, so that's why I put it on this list. This sounds like a fun time. Going back into the older work now, I think this one is probably the oldest one on the list. This is a collection of short stories called The Dark Eidolon. So Clark Ashton Smith was a author, poet, and an artist back in the 20s and 30s. He was friends with H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, who were also authors at the time. So like I said, this one is a collection of his short stories and poems called The Dark Eidolon and other short stories. I don't know what any of them are about. I think they are kind of cosmic horror, sci-fi, dark fantasy stuff. I've been wanting to get into Clark Ashton Smith ever since last summer when I first heard about him, reading through Gats Macabre by Stephen King, which is his non-fiction book about his love for the horror genre. He mentioned Clark Ashton Smith in there a couple times, so I've been wanting to give him a try since then. Next is The Fisherman by John Langan. The Fisherman by John Langan. This is about a kind of a creek or a place somewhere in upstate New York, and two men who go there to get some answers about something, or they might go fishing there. I don't remember what the synopsis said exactly, but it has been billed as a cosmic horror tale. So immediately my mind comes to Lovecraft with his cosmic horror. So we'll see how that plays out. I've heard mixed things on this one, so I'll have to take that with a grain of salt when I do read this, though. And the last two, first one is Those Across the River by Christopher Buehlman. So Christopher Buehlman, I think, is mostly well known for Between Two Fires, which I think is a medieval horror. But I also do have that one on my list. I think I had this one on there first, so I'm going to tentatively start with this one. This one's about a small town with a lot of secrets and an older adult man who goes back to town to discover the secrets or something. I don't know. I saw it on a list of scary books a long time ago and added it to my list. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this one though. I've heard talk about the Between Two Fires one, but not this one. So I may or may not start with this one. We'll see. This kind of depends on which one I come across first, I guess. But that is, what is it? That is Those Across the River. So down to number 10 here. This is Suffer the Children by Craig DiLouie. This one is kind of a story about vampire or zombie children, and a kind of a plague thing that turns children into the zombie vampire things. This is another one I saw on a list of scary books, and I added it to mine several years ago, but I have not gotten to it yet. Sounds very creepy, just from the basic premise that I've read. This is also another one that I have not heard a lot of talk about. ever since I have first come across it, so it should be interesting to see what the discourse is on this one. But that brings me to the end of this list, I'm afraid to say. So, if you have read any of these, go ahead and pat yourself on the back. I don't know what I was going for there. If you have any more recommendations for horror books for me, feel free to drop those in the comments. I'm always looking for more of those. I really do enjoy reading horror books, even though I haven't read a lot of them in the past couple of months. And for this list, I actually had around 20 that I first counted. I had to cut it down to 10, so I could do a part 2 to this list at some point, if I do manage to knock some of these ones out. So I may schedule that in some point. But anyways, that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching. You can find my links to Instagram and Goodreads in the description. And so that's all I have. So thank you for watching, and